Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. I'd also like to thank the public libraries in Ashland, Bedford, Belmont, Canton, and Dedham for partnering with us on this program. Copies of the author's books are available for purchase through Bookends in Winchester, Massachusetts. I will add the link to the chat. You can also borrow the books from the Minuteman Library Network. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Marilyn Levinson, who writes as Allison Brook, about Overdue or Die, the most recent release in her Haunted Library series, and Mia P. Manansala's Murder and Maman, which is the most recent book in her Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. If you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A or chat. I have my Cary Library mug from our second annual Cary Buck of Love celebration, which was held this past December, and it's filled with hot tea. And I also wore my coziest sweater, so make sure you're nice and comfortable because we're going to get started. Now I'd like to introduce our guest. Marilyn Levinson is a former Spanish teacher. She writes mysteries, romantic suspense, and novels for kids. Books have received many accolades. As Allison Brook, she writes the Haunted Library series. Death Overdue, the first in the series, was an Agatha nominee for Best Contemporary Novel in 2018. Overdue or Die, the seventh book in the series, had its debut October 10th. Other mysteries include the Golden Age of Mystery Book Club series and the Twin Lakes series. Her juvenile novel Rufus and Magic Run Amok was an International Reading Association's Children's Book Council Children's Choice and has recently come out in a new edition. And Don't Bring Jeremy was a nominee for 6 state awards. Her YA horror, The Devil's Pawn, will be out in a new edition next year. Marilyn lives on Long Island, where many of her books take place. She loves traveling, reading, doing crossword puzzles and Sudoku, and chatting on FaceTime with her grandkids and playing with her kittens, Romeo and Juliet. Mia P. Manansala is a writer and book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. She uses humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. She is the winner of the 2022 Anthony Award for Best First Novel, 2022 Macavity Award for Best First Novel, 2022 Rusa Reading List for Mystery, 2021 Agatha Award for Best First Novel, 2018 Hugh Holton Award, the 2018 Eleanor Taylor Bland Crime Fiction Writers of Color Award, the 2017 William F. Deek Malice Domestic Grant for Unpublished Writers, and the 2016 Mystery Writers of America Helen McCloy Scholarship. She was shortlisted for the 2021 Goodreads Choice Award for Mystery Thriller and the 2021 Cherby Award for Fiction by the Chicago Review of Books. She's also a 2017 Pitch Wars alum and 2018 to 2020 mentor. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, playing JRPGs and dating sims, reading cozy mysteries and diverse romance, and cuddling her dogs Gumiho and Max Power. Her debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, came out May 4th, 2021 with Berkeley Penguin Random House and is the first in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. Murder and Maman has its debut in September. Welcome, Mia and Marilyn. We are so excited to have you join us tonight.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yes, very glad to be here.
So I have to say that I've never read a cozy mystery book before. And so I wanted to say how much I enjoyed both of your books because it's like I said to you earlier, it's like a beach read with a lot more intrigue. So it's been very fun to read. And so I'm happy to share your books tonight with our guests. So before we dive into your books, I'd like to talk a bit about your writing journey. And we typically have some inspiring writers in our audience, so I'm sure they'll be really interested in hearing what you have to say. So can you share what inspired you to write your first book? I'll have Marilyn start.
I wrote my first book so long ago, I can hardly remember. And you know, it's coming out. It's coming out in July. Because this is what happens sometimes when you persevere things really begin to gel, sometimes later in life. I just started to write. I started writing short stories, and I ended up working with someone who became a very dear friend. In fact, my blog, which is coming out Thursday, is my giving thanks to my friend Roberta Gellis, who is a wonderful writer, and I just seem to learn how to write, how to craft a novel through her. She wrote many different genres. And my first book was a children's book, and Don't Bring Jeremy. And I started writing children's books, and they weren't selling that well or that often. And so I decided to write mysteries, which is what I love to read. And things really took off when Dawn Dowdle, who unfortunately just died 2 months ago, became my agent. And for some reason or other, the Haunted Library series really took off. And suddenly it was starred this, and it was just all over the place. And the series was very, very successful. I just finished writing the 8th, and I ended a series, which is something most authors don't do. And I'm starting a new series.
Fabulous. Did you find that it was a difficult transition from writing children's books to writing your mystery books?
No, because I write both. I still write both. I'm in the funny position. I'm having 8 books coming out this year. And I told people I can't do any more because, Mia, this is what happens. What happened, it's like these people they want to republish my books. So three new books are coming out, and the rest are going to be republished, which gives me a very good feeling, because it means that the books, are still, there's still a value. And then I'm also still, I wrote Rufus and Magic Run Amok, and I wrote the second book that came out already, and Dawn had gotten me a 4-book contract, so I have 2 more of those books out. I don't feel very much of a difference between writing, because you're writing from the character's point of view. So you're a little boy, or you're a cat, or you're a ghost. I have ghosts. And so it's writing. It's, you're acting out a role, is what it seems to me.
Okay, thank you. And what about your journey, Mia?
My journey's not super straightforward. So, there's a difference between the first book I finished and the first book that got published.
Mhm.
A big difference between that. So you guys, like, for the first book that got published, which was my debut, Arsenic and Adobo, there were 2 inspirations for why I started writing that. One is like the more general of like why I love cozy mystery to begin with, is it's my mom's favorite genre. She's the one who got me into them. She's actually a page at a library here in Chicago, which, she's the people who put the books on the shelves. And one day, she was shelving books, and she was like, huh, chocolate chip cookie murder. What's this about? Which is the first book in the very popular Hannah Swenson, Joanne Fluke Cozy Mysteries. And, she messaged me one day like, oh my God, I found books that combine like our 2 favorite things, which are like mysteries and food. Because we grew up reading mysteries in my house. And so I started buddy reading that series with my mom. It was my first introduction to cozies, and my first introduction to culinary cozies in particular, which is what I write. And I really loved them. I thought they were so much fun, but I never saw myself in them. It was pretty hard to see myself in any literature, really, but particularly in those kinds of books. People that look like me, people that sound like me, people with my kind of experiences just did not exist. So I always knew I wanted to bring my own perspective, put my own spin on those kinds of books. Like that's like the general like why cozy. For this particular book and series, my mentor is this you mentioned in my bio I was part of a mentorship program called Pitch Wars. My mentor is this wonderful author named Kelly Garrett, Kellye. There's actually 2 mystery writing Kelly Garretts. My mentor has 2 E's in her name. She's a wonderful Black woman writer. Hollywood Homicide, Like a Sister, all of that. And we were chatting one day about the contemporary cozies we'd been reading. And she was like, have you noticed that, all the cozies we've been reading are basically like rom-coms? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like that, like, at the time, like, it didn't make any sense to me. Like, how could these murder mysteries have anything in common with romantic comedies? And she's like, look it, like, break it down. And I was like, oh, you're right. All the books that we had read shortly before that conversation, they all featured a youngish woman, always a woman, between the ages of maybe like late 20s, early 40s, who was from a small town, moved to the big city, couldn't hack it, had to return to work at her family's like really niche, ridiculous, like Christmas tree lot or the candle making, like something really like that does not make money to that family business. And then, um and try to figure out their life and like fall in love again, either like romantically or like with their town or with their new life and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, cozies are just rom-coms with dead bodies. And then when I approached it from that point of view, one day I was on the train on my way to like my previous job, 2 jobs ago actually. Oof, time. And the first line of the book that would become Arsenic and Adobo popped into my head fully formed, which was, "My name is Lila Macapagal, and my life has become a rom-com cliche." And I was like, "Oh, that's something. That's good." And so I pulled out my phone and I started writing it in my notes app. And as I wrote it, the second line came to me, which was, "Not many romantic comedies feature Asian American leads or dead bodies, but more on that later." And then so like with those 2 lines, I had like a voice. I had like that character named herself. Like my mom asked me like, "Oh, what made you-" like I have no idea. That name, those two sentences fully formed. The voice was there. I had my in, and then everything else was just trying to um figure out like what story is she trying to tell me. And so no book has ever been that easy to write. I started that book in 2018. It published 2021. And in the many, many revisions during that time, those first 2 lines stayed exactly the same. Um, I wish I could recover that ease again, but it's a very special book for me.
Yeah, that's such a special moment when all of a sudden it's something like the first 2 lines pop into your head, and then are you just kind of like developing your story around it? But more on that later. I won't get into that. So okay, let's dive into your books. So for those who haven't had a chance to read your book, could you give us a synopsis and then read a passage to give your audience a taste of your book? I'll have Mia start.
Sure. So I write the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series, which is lighthearted, humorous mystery centered around a family-owned Filipino restaurant in a fictional town outside of Chicago. And so since I mentioned Arsenic and Adobo, I figure it's always best to start from the beginning. So this is Arsenic and Adobo, little puppy Longanisa. And I'll just read um, the first page since I already mentioned those first 2 lines. Sorry. This is the opening page. My name is Lila Macapagal, and my life has become a rom-com cliche. Not many romantic comedies feature an Asian American lead or dead bodies, but more on that later. But all the hallmarks are there. Girl from improbably named small town in the Midwest moves to the big city to make a name for herself and find love. Check. Girl achieves these things, only for the world to come crashing down when she walks in on her fiance getting down and dirty with their next door neighbors. Yes, plural. Double check. Girl then moves back home in disgrace and finds work reinvigorating her aunt's failing business. Well, now we're up to a hat trick of cliches. And to put the cherry on top, in the trope of all tropes, I even reconnected with my high school sweetheart after moving back to town and discovered the true meaning of Christmas. Um, so yeah, that's the first page. And again, as I said, you can see how those first 2 lines shaped exactly how I dove into the story. And then after that, I can introduce the character and the aunt's. But Tita means aunt in Tagalog, so she works in her aunt's restaurant, and it's being threatened by her food critic ex-boyfriend who's been trying to get them shut down. He dies in their restaurant after eating their food, as it happens. And she is obviously the main suspect in his murder. So that's how Arsenic and Adobo starts.
Thank you. And Marilyn, can you give us a synopsis and read a passage, please?
Okay, well, Overdue or Die is the 7th book in the Haunted Library series. Carrie's best friend's name is Angela, and Angela's married, And Carrie is getting married. That she's trying to find a place to that really suits her and her husband, her future husband. And I'm going to read to you an excerpt to show you how mysteries just seem to happen to her. A lot of this book has to do with the art gallery in town and the whole syndicate. And my books are kind of complicated, but the plots always come together. They bring different elements together, which is not always the easiest thing to do. I'll read you an excerpt now. They're eating in a in a restaurant, and they've just finished eating. I used the facilities, taking my time to comb my hair and refresh my lipstick. No need to rush. I knew Angela was content to sit quietly and enjoy her second cup of coffee. I smiled, relieved that Dylan had recovered from his attack and was coming home tomorrow. I hoped my father would be able to retrieve the stolen painting on general principle. I cared nothing for the painting, either aesthetically or emotionally, but Dylan wanted to donate it to a museum. I hoped he would get the chance to do that. I opened the bathroom door, ready to return to our table, but quickly closed it, leaving a few inches so I could peer down the corridor. Victor Zelinka stood in the doorway of the small dining room at the far end of the hall, chatting in low tones with someone inside the room. A woman. I managed to make out with short gray hair, who was considerably shorter than Victor. This way I'll be able to see better. He finally reached down to wrap his arms around her. After a moment, they laughed and exchanged pleasantries. I believed I heard mention of a future meeting. Then the door shut, and Victor whistled as he started down the hall toward the main dining room. I quickly closed the bathroom door and let a minute pass before I rejoined Angela. What happened to you? She asked. I was beginning to think you got caught up in a murder case, one I know nothing about. No murder, but look who's there. I pointed to Victor, who was exiting the restaurant. He was in one of the private dining rooms with a woman. From the way they said goodbye, I'd say it was a rendezvous. Angela laughed. I doubt it. People go to a motel for a rendezvous. Besides, Victor has no reason to be secretive about dating a woman. He's a widower, remember? Maybe the woman's married, I said. Angela and I grinned at each other. I held up my hand to catch our waitress's attention. After we paid for our lunch, Angela and I remained at our table, waiting for the mysterious woman who had lunch with Victor to leave the small dining room so we could see who she was. Only that never happened. Where can she be, I wondered. Finally, Angela stood. We can't stay here all day. I noticed the door at the end of the corridor. Maybe that's how she left the restaurant. In which case, she's long gone. Do you have something more important to do? I asked. Angela shook her head. I felt a sense of excitement as I led the way down the corridor. Was I that addicted to mysteries that my life wasn't complete until I was chasing down clues and secrets? I stopped in front of the room where I'd seen Victor talking to the woman and put my ear to the door. Nothing. I surprised myself by raising a hand and knocking. Hello, anyone there? What are you doing? Angela hissed. Hello, I said louder. I turned the handle and entered the room. There were the remnants of a meal shared by two people on the small serving table, the coffee cups and dessert plates still on the table. She's gone, Angela said. I left the room as quickly as I'd entered and zoomed towards a door at the end of the corridor. Where are you going? Angela asked as she chased after me. Just checking a few things, I said, letting my intuition guide me. Once outside, we followed the narrow path that ran along the waterfront. Susan Roberts and Martha Mallory were sitting on one of the benches facing the Sound. Martha was speaking earnestly. From the little I heard, it sounded as though she was trying to convince Susan to do something, while Susan looked pensive. What I'd feared for months was finally happening. I was about to lose my treasured assistant. Look, Angela whispered as she grabbed my arm. Ouch! Sorry, but there's our mystery woman. Martha's hair is gray. And she isn't very tall.
Thank you. Before I go on to our next question, I see that Marianne Dunford has your hand raised. We're just going to take some of the questions towards the end. So if you have any questions, please save them. We'll have some time for it at the end. So thank you, Marilyn. And so let's start with you. What was the inspiration for your story, and were the characters based on people you knew or met?
You know, I think after a while, when you write so many books, you have no idea who the characters are based on. And I suppose they're a composite of people you know or make up. I mean, I know people who, you know, they're angry at something. They have this person murdered in their story, but I don't do that. And my characters just arise as I need them is really what it is. Um, the reason I often this is in a town that takes place that's built around a green, and I do mention Susan has had a lot of work in the art gallery, and I do mention the Mallorys in previous books, so I just naturally use them as characters, and out of that came, you know, this all this different things. Her fiance was just Carrie's fiance was just hit his a painting was stolen from him that happened to be worth a lot of money, and there's something going on in the art gallery. So I can't say I know what inspired me, other than I was continuing the series.
Great, thank you. I just didn't know if like maybe you had worked in a library, and
Oh, the
so
library. Well, the role that Carrie, my good friend Wood had that role actually. And as a writer, I'm in the library a lot. So, but what inspired me to write this series was we have a beautiful area in my library where you can sit outside, and we were having a drum someone was doing we had a drum concert, you know, a one person, and it was amazing. And actually the head of adult programs came and introduced him, and I was sitting there and I was thinking, gee, that would be a wonderful sleuth, you know, because a library is a small world in itself, right? And she could bring in all these different people to do all these different wonderful you know, and all forms of entertainment, classes, whatever you want. And yet there's still the people in the library, and it's a small world. It's a small world within the town. The town was a town that I had passed only once, but it stayed in my mind. And of course, I created my own town. It's really, it's a real town in Connecticut that I used, but I changed quite a bit. And so I guess I did use what I knew or saw or was familiar with and built on it.
great, thank you. And Mia, we already know the inspiration for your story was talking to your mom about the culinary mysteries. But were the characters based on people that you knew or met?
Mm. Well, like Marilyn said, like I don't want that kind of drama in my life, so I don't do any like one-to-one like character bases. Everyone's like kind of like a compilation. So like so some of the most popular character books are the calendar crew, like the aunties. The names, you know, April, May, and June. They're not related. They're my characters' godmothers. And for me, they are like every auntie I've ever met in my life. Whether, you know, and again, like there's a difference between an aunt and an auntie. And you know, auntie is not a it doesn't have to be a blood relation. You know, it's a very particular kind of person. And so some of the things that the character says, like they've said to me, like in the first scene that they show up in Arsenic and Adobo, one of them is like, oh, you get bigger every time I see you. I'm like, that's been said to me, you know, like that is like, I'll use moments, I'll use things like that, I'll use like stories that my friends have told me about their aunties in their life. um but they're almost like a Greek, or like they stand for every auntie in the world. But everyone else is what I like to do is I like to, if I do technically base a character on someone, I will take a quality or a characteristic from someone in my life and then build a character around that so they become their own thing. So like a big part of my books is food as a love language, right? The character, the Tita Rosie character, the aunt, who helped raise my protagonist. My protagonist is an orphan. Her parents died when she was young. She grew up with her paternal aunt and paternal grandmother, who run the restaurant together. Not to be super stereotypical, but like I did not grow up in a house where like I love yous were said out loud, right? That's not that common necessarily in many Filipino families, right? Physical affection, right? My parents didn't like hug me and kiss me and say all that. Particularly like my mom a little bit more. My mom is much more affectionate, but my father was very old school, very typical, very, quiet, stoic man, but he could throw down in the kitchen. And he worked really long hours at his factory job, and then he would come home and cook these like massive feasts on the weekends for our huge multi-generational family. And when you're a kid you don't realize, but when you get older you realize like that was his way of showing love, like him taking care of us in the way that he knew how. That was his love language. And so I took the idea of that and put it in my Tita Rosie character. Like nobody reading it who knew my father would be like, "Oh yeah, that's your dad." Like my mom reads all my books. She's not like, "Oh, it's just like daddy." Like no. But that was a defining characteristic that I thought would make a great important side character in a cozy mystery. Things like that. People who are like very, very ridiculous, who are characters in real life, sometimes don't actually translate to the page so much because like, oh, that's too outrageous. Nobody would ever say or do anything like that. I'm like, but you take something that you find really fun and then you build something around it and make them their own person. I love doing that. And so each book has, if it's not inspired by a person, each book is inspired by a different thing. So as I said, this one is just my love of cozy mysteries, and particularly culinary cozies. It's almost like an adult coming of age story, which I think is very typical of millennials, where you think you're supposed to be an adult and have all these certain like markers of what makes you an adult by a certain age, but those milestones don't really exist anymore, not the way they do. Um, my second book, Hamsa and Halo Halo, the inspiration was me thinking, okay, what does the Philippines and small town America have in common? Beauty pageants. They love beauty pageants. So the second one involves beauty pageants. What else does the Philippines and like, most of America love? Not everyone, obviously, but Christmas. Black Male Mbinga takes place around Christmas. The Philippines has the longest Christmas season in the world. They start celebrating in September. No joke. The Burr months. Like if you were to visit the Philippines in September and go to the mall, they are playing Christmas carols. Like Mariah Carey like posted on Spotify like All I Want for Christmas Was You, like it hit #1 in September, and she's like, "Thank you Filipino," because she knew it was the Philippines. Like obviously who else is listening to that song in September? So I take like little inspirations and things like that to get me. For this one, I can't remember the Murder in Mamonos is my most recent one. I can't remember the exact I think the inspiration was that as much as difficult as dealing with the aunties are in real life, they're so much fun to write. And so in this book, I got to center them because usually with all the other books, I mean, I would know, usually it's like, oh, someone I love has become the suspect in a murder. I have to defend them. Here, it looks like they might be the intended victims. And she needs to find the people who are going after them before someone else gets hurt. So it was a very, very different kind of thing where I got to like, instead of like the aunties being the nosy ones and getting all the gossip, she gets to dive in and try to find out what all their secrets are and what they're hiding that has made them a target. So this was a very interesting departure from my previous books.
Yeah, I love the calendar crew. They're exactly what you say. There's aunties and there's aunts, even in Chinese culture. And so your Tita is the aunt who wants to feed you all the time. What do you love most about your cast of characters, and whose character was the most interesting to develop? I'll go back to Marilyn.
I love Carrie's father, Jim. Okay. he was a thief, and he wasn't a very successful one. He's been arrested. I mean, he was in jail. He comes into the second book, Red and Gone, which is a holiday book, takes place in December. And he breaks into her house after she's just had a birthday party, and she feels this is a perfect life. She has a boyfriend, and she has a job she loves, and now she has some stability in her life. And in at 3 in the morning, her father appears, and he wants her to be a liaison with this man, the jeweler in town, who happens to be a thief too, because they were in on a heist together, and he kept all the money, and her father, and Carrie is horrified. She adored her father, and even when he wasn't out in jail, which wasn't really that often, he just stayed away from the family. And he and his wife are divorced. And each book I dedicate, one to him and one to her, Carrie's relationship with her mother. I go into all these things very deeply. And what I love about Jim is, even in that book, you see he's accused of murdering the jeweler. The jeweler's found dead. And Carrie has to defend him, find out what happens. And she's horrified. Her boyfriend, Dylan's just has recently become her boyfriend. And she's horrified to find out that Dylan, who is an investigator, was even looking in on her father, was checking out her father for a case, and she thinks he was using her, which he wasn't. But over the course of the series, and this is why I love writing a series, over the course of the series, you see how Jim changes. He loves his daughter, and Carrie was so hurt that she adored her father, but he always was disappointing her. He'd say, we'll do this, and then he wouldn't do it. And he wasn't reliable. Well, he ends up getting a job with the company. Well, Dylan becomes a partner in this investigating company. And because Jim knows all about the other end of things, he goes to Atlanta and works with Dylan's former boss, who's now the senior partner. And over the course of this series, he gets married, and he becomes like a helicopter dad. And I'm crying when he's walking her down the aisle in the last book, you see. And it's like, oh my God. And it's just such a change in him. And this is what I love about this series, is that I know a lot of people were upset that I ended it a lot. And because you see the changes in the people. But that is why I ended it, because I felt the story arc is complete. And I mean, if I kept writing it, it would be Mr. and Mrs. North, which is fine. It's just that it's a different series. But but Jim is who really got to me, and he even comes in at one point to help his ex-wife, and she's accused of murder, and she remarries too. And I mean, she remarried a very handsome younger man. But characters, they get to you. They really get to you.
Yeah, you see Carrie really developing from the very first book and into the last one, Overdue or Die, where she's just matured so much and just just becomes such a much more confident person. And what about you, Mia? What do you love most about your cast of characters, and whose character was the most interesting to develop?
Yeah. And did so that's like the fun of creating these series characters. But it's also like a weird like tightrope you have to walk, because they have to change, right? Like a static character can be so boring. They have to do like little mini changes and then changing as time. But at the same time, you can't change so much, because you're supposed to be able to pick up a book at any stage. You don't have to read from book one and read them in order, even though I always do. But like technically, the publisher likes it. Like, my book 5 comes out later this year. You could pick up book 5 having never read any of the others, and you're supposed to immediately understand who this character is, what their world is like, and just and be able to latch on in that way. And so you don't want them to be so different that you're like, what? Who is when you go back? So like that natural progression, especially in a long running series, is fascinating, right? Like the fact that you're able to do that is really cool. Um, as I mentioned before, I really like the Calendar Crew. They're fun to write. I also have a soft spot for Adina, the protagonist's best friend. She is very loyal, very ride or die. She's that person you always want in your corner. Um, she's that person who will help you like solve a crime when you find a dead body. She's also that person who will help you move that dead body should you need to. It's not happened, but she is that kind of person where if you like called her at like 3 a.m. and you're like, don't ask questions, I need your help, she'll be like, be right there. and that's and that's kind of a very fun person to write. She can also really easily overpower the scene. So in the first book, Arsenic and Adobo, I have a whole subplot involving her that I had to take out because it was really fun. It really deepened and informed the character, and it worked well, but it wasn't her story, right? It was Lila's story. It was my protagonist's story, and it was actually taking away from what I needed to be doing, and it was distracting in some ways. So I was like, okay, that's one of those things where yes, this subplot happened, but it doesn't need to happen on the page. I know it in my head. It will inform for me the way I write this character and who she is going forward. Um, but this is not something that the readers need to be privy to at the moment because it's not her story. But I still am like, oh, I really wish. I wish I had been able to work it out in a way where I could have had both. But um, it doesn't matter how much you love a thing if it's not the best for your story, you got to take it out.
Yeah, and I love the relationship between Lila, Adina, and
Elena.
Elena, exactly. They really have a very close friendship and just kind of like ride or dies for each other, and I love that. So Mia, I'm gonna go back to you. When you began writing your series, what themes were most important for you to include? I know you talked about wanting to be able to see yourself in some of these cozy mysteries that you hadn't seen before. Were there other themes that were important for you to include?
I mean, one of the things that I love about cozy mysteries is that they are still crime fiction, right? We still get to talk about things that are very important to us, that are very serious topics, but in ways that are easily digestible and entertaining, and maybe will actually be easier to get through to a reader because I'm not like standing on a soapbox handing out pamphlets yelling at you like social justice. You get to like read like this fun story that like the second book, again, Homicide and Hollow, it takes place in the summertime. It's centered around a beauty pageant, because I really love the movies like Drop Dead Gorgeous and Miss Congeniality, and I thought it's super fun, but I also got to talk about like colonial standards of beauty and like the patriarchy and predatory behavior that surrounds things like and I get to talk about things that are important to me in a way that is still entertaining, I hope, without trivializing them. At least I hope not. So all of my books contain like an author's note in the beginning, with content warnings. Just because you pick like again, like you look at this, it's like, oh, look at how bright and colorful, and look at that cute little puppy. I'm gonna read this because I don't know, life's not going so well right now, and I need an escape. And then you open it up, and you're like, oh, PTSD, and talks of like this and that. And I'm like, well, you can't escape it. Again, it's the murder mystery. There's going to be some uncomfortable topics, but maybe you are not in the mood or not ready to read about that particular topic at the moment, right? I mentioned earlier that my father had passed away, you know, and when I was trying to get over it, I read a lot of romance, just really happy, beautiful, joyful things. But romance is also very, very nuanced, right? There's lots of different things. And so one of my best friends who was introducing me to romances, she was like, oh, one of my favorite authors, oh, geez, I'm blanking on her name. Um, but and it was like here's this book. I think you'll really like it. But just to warn you, it deals with grief from parental death. I don't know if this is one of my favorite books, but I don't know if it's right for you right now, considering you're reading to get over your grief. And I'm like, Thank you for that warning. I will set it aside until I'm ready. And that's what I try to do, because I do want to talk about very real, difficult things. And I think it's important that we grapple with these things, but I also don't want to like throw it at you when you're just trying to have a good time.
Right. And then there's also the lighthearted themes of like friendship and family. That's
Oh
always
yeah,
so
friendship and
important.
family always, yes. And that
Mhm.
love, people show love in many different ways. And it might not be the way that you need. Um, and like learning what those boundaries are, like, this person is showing you love the way that they can, but is that still enough for you? They are trying, but is that enough? And having to, grapple with that,
Yeah, thank you.
multi-generational things.
Mhm. And what about you, Marilyn? When you began writing your series, what themes were most important for you to include?
Okay, well, I do touch on a few issues. Like one thing that you know that in the cold weather, the library gets filled with people who have no place to go, and they can create problems and issues. And I dealt with it, and in a book, and also in the last book I wrote. I don't know how I got on this. I about my book takes place in Connecticut. And do you know that there were people who were hung as witches before 50 years before the Salem witch trials? Well, I got involved in this in my book that's coming out in August. And one of the issues I was writing about is that people were trying to get these people to be exonerated. This is from like almost 500 years ago. They were hung as witches, and then, of course, they weren't witches, and they were never, pardoned. While I was writing it, an action was going forward as if they were doing it. They were about to do it. So I had to write an author's note. But what I do touch on these issues, but the most important thing to me in my books are my characters' relationships with each other. And as I said, I go into Carrie's her relationship with her father, and I go into her relationship with her mother. And her mother was not the maternal type. She's not the maternal type. And I don't make it gushy gooey. Oh, now we're best friends at all. This is not what happens at all. And but she gets to understand her mother a little bit better. And I also go into Dylan's relationship with his parents, because I feel it's really important to go back for them at least to see what impacted their lives when they were growing up. And you never meet Dylan's parents; they have died before the books began. But Carrie gets to understand something about them. I also have a paranormal element in my books, and don't ask me why, because I don't know. I my Rufus I wrote my Rufus book before Harry Potter, a boy who finds out he's a witch. And it's just as natural to me as writing any other character. And I'm not doing it because it's the in thing. It wasn't the in thing. Now it's the in thing. I don't know why, but many of my books have a ghost in them. I think I never met a ghost, but I think this is my way of paying tribute to ghosts. I think they exist. And to me, it's another dimension of my books. So that is another element that may or may not be it's not been. I don't have ghosts in all my mysteries, other series, but I do in this series, and I will have one in the one that's coming.
Thank you. And I'm just going to jump to a question that popped up on Q&A. But before I do that, if anyone has questions for Marilyn or Mia, please enter them into the Q&A or chat, and we'll try to get to them. So for the Q&A, why did Marilyn choose to have a ghost haunt the library? And will Mia comment a bit about her dog character, Loganisa, please? So we'll go with Marilyn first, since the question was addressed to you first.
Well, I usually, when I have a ghost, I limit them to where they can be. And this is an old building. It's about 350 years old. I just thought that it loaned itself to a ghost. This is a woman who used to work at the library, and she helps Carrie solve mysteries, but sometimes she holds back information because she's related to this very unpleasant a librarian who's in the first few books. Unfortunately, she dies. And so if she thinks any of her relatives are involved with her death, she doesn't want to give any help, you know. So that's why I just brought it in as an added dimension. And in one or two of the other books, there is in one book, in Dewey Decimated, there is another ghost. And it's just, to me, something that I do.
Thank you. And Mia, would you like to
Yeah.
talk about Loganisa?
Yeah, sure. So, I spend so much time crafting backstory for my characters and try to make them as like real and three-dimensional as possible. And like the dog is my most popular character. So Longanisa is my protagonist little dachshund. So she's on all my covers. Longanisa is a type of Filipino sausage. So obviously you had to have a little sausage dog. Um, Nisa for short. And so as my mom, when my debut came out, so again, as I mentioned before, my mom works at a library. She's a big reader. She also worked at Walden Books before she started her library job. Big readers in our family, big mystery fans. And so she read my first book, and then she also would read my Goodreads reviews. I'm like, "Mommy, don't go on Goodreads. It's not a good place for us." But then she brought up, she's like, this one review she saw, she was like, she's like, Mia, this reviewer thinks the dog doesn't show up enough. And you know what? They're right. And she's like, in the Joanne Fluke books, Moish the cat, the cat, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the cat's name correctly. Like whenever, she comes home, she always mentions the cat, and the cat is always there, and it's a big part of the things. And you need to mention Longanisa more, so the dog needs to become a bigger part of your books. And I'm like, okay, mommy. So like if you read my books from the beginning, you'll start noticing Longanisa showing up more and more. Like I literally like made the dog I literally like she so in it's not really a spoiler. In the second book, she opens a cafe with her best friends. Suddenly it's a dog friendly cafe or a pet friendly cafe. And then oh suddenly this dog is having costume changes like in the middle, like multiple outfits. Like that dog is better dressed than I will ever be in my life. Because there's like an artist character who was introduced in the second book, like the daughter of a friend who's an aspiring artist who's like making little clothes and stuff like that for the dog. So like I have to start describing the dog's outfits in every book. And so Longanisa shows up more and more. She does play a role in certain, possibly finding a body or two, things like that. Obviously, it's a cozy mystery. She will be fine. Nothing bad will ever happen to her. She's gonna live forever. She's safe. But yes, Longanisa is definitely my most popular character, and now I have to start thinking of more and more ways to include her to keep my mom happy.
I love Loganisa too. Love all the outfits. So I love the culinary elements in each of your books. And so Mia, I wish there was a Bruja Cafe near me. I'm pretty sure I'd be there every
Oh,
day. So is the Bruja Cafe a dream business or is it based on an actual place?
no, it's like wish fulfillment. I'm like, okay, like what if, there's a cafe where the drinks and like the dessert, like the bakes and stuff like that are inspired by like a character's back. So again, like I'm Filipino American. My protagonist is Filipino American. Her best friend Adina is Pakistani American. Adina's girlfriend and their other best friend Elena, she's Mexican American. So all the offerings um, draw on their individual backgrounds. So it's very there's a lot of fun coming up with that menu, and then but they also have their own talents. It's called the Bruja Cafe. The brew like BREW dash H, Bruja meaning witch in both Spanish and Tagalog, but then also, so they also play a little bit on that, like they're whipping up magic. So Elena is kind of like the green witch. So there's like a section with like plants and herbs and teas and this like and that. And then there's the barista who's Adina, and then my character's in charge of all the baking. And like, what if like suddenly there's like a little spot where like local artists can hang their things, and oh, suddenly it's pet friendly, like all these like like that's the best part of like one, it being in a fictional town. I can make it grow and change as I need, and also that being a fictional business. I'm like, what? No one knows how big it is. Like, what else can I add in here to make
I was
this
just gonna
work
say that.
for
What
my
else are you gonna add?
story? Yeah. Yeah, so with book 4, like it's springtime, so I was like, "Ooh, okay, like let's let's have like lots of fun with this menu and talk about like the interior in that way." And so a lot of times my books are based around like seasonal things or like events or holidays, just so because people ask like, "How do you know how to choose what recipes?" And some, in the Philippines like there is no season. It's like hot or raining while still hot, and but like here I can kind of like budget. I'm like, okay, well, if it's summertime, obviously we're gonna want like more icy desserts and things like that, which is what halo halo is. It's a shaved ice dessert. Okay, Christmas time, there's these traditional foods that were usually served on this, so I can do with that. Springtime, okay, there's no spring in the Philippines, but in my mind, spring means green. So, and also floral. So, like, what are these fun flavors and visuals that I can play with? So, things like that.
Yeah, it's really fun seeing you build Bruja Cafe into like a bigger and bigger business. First it's coffee, and then it's the baked goods, and
Yeah.
then it's the plants. I'm like, I need to find a place like this.
I wish.
Yeah, me too. So Marilyn, I loved your small town, and it has a diverse restaurant scene as well, where the choice is based on your own favorite places to go.
Well, I love Indian restaurants, so I put one in. And I just thought the Cozy Corner Cafe was a good place that would be close by, and they could eat there. And other restaurants, I just made them up, and it's always nice to have an inn on the green. And and I always, and then that's Italian restaurant that the friends. And I couldn't believe some of those stories that came out. I wrote in the first book, Death Overdue. I go on and on about these two friends, Due Amiche, two friends, how they built this restaurant and how it ends up with this a murder. And the story just came out of me. I don't know. It was like eerie. It was like, um, somebody is telling Carrie how the restaurant came about, and I mean, sometimes that happens. These little side, I don't know, these little, they're a little asides, but they're little stories of their own. They just appear. So I just keep it in the book. And that happened in another time in the series, that a story came out of a story. And I just said, all right, let me go with it. I've learned to trust, the method, and to let it go. And they stay in. So this is what happens. But I do bring that restaurant, the Italian restaurant, in throughout the book, throughout the series, because that's their favorite Italian restaurant.
I think my favorite is probably the Precipice.
Oh, right. Yeah. I thought I should become an architect. It's all glass. It's overlooking the lake. I know. And even that seafood restaurant that they go to, where Jim tells Carrie and Dylan that he and Mary are getting married. But I do bring the restaurants back again and again, because again, you want people to have the feeling of the town. And the restaurant doesn't appear once, but it appears pretty often.
Yeah, definitely. I get a feeling of a New England town when I'm considering your setting. So we have a question. Great talk. Do either of you have any input in the pricing of your published work? If so, how do you decide?
Nope. Not when you're with the traditional publisher.
No, I feel so bad, because I know that my books are very expensive, and I'm very happy when there's a sale. And I will add that I have no really say when it comes to titles. I don't know about Mia, but I just had a title changed on me, and they already had ads out. I saw it. I happened to Google it, and they changed it because there was a problem with salespeople felt that the title, I guess, I think would lead people to think something, well, I don't know, but I really liked the title. And so I went with what they suggested, but I have no control over that either.
Yeah, titles are hard. It's amazing how much power like sales and marketing, like the sales team has. Um, like my Arsenic and Adobo was sold. I mean, I like Arsenic and Adobo better, but like that's not what it was sold as. It was sold as Love, Lost, and Lumpia. Lumpia being a Filipino spring roll. They rightly said it doesn't sound mystery enough, and as a debut, you want it to sound. You want people to know what it is immediately when picking it up. They suggested a title that I hated, and so I went back with a bunch of other possible ones, and the sales team chose Arsenic and Adobo from the list, and I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that to begin with? And and after that, all the other ones were really easy because like they're all alliterative crime word and Filipino food, so all of them were really easy until my newest one, book 5, which I'm writing and comes out in November of this year, actually got pushed back due to various production issues, where like we had to fight so much about the name, because the Murder in Mamon came out in September. Mamon is like a chiffon cake. And so the book 5 takes place. I was like, ooh, let's get real Midwest with it. It takes place during a corn festival, the town's local corn festival. And so I wanted to include food that has corn in it. And in Tagalog and also in Spanish, the word for corn is maíz. And so I was like, okay, malice and maíz con hielo. And they're like, no, we don't want 2M titles in a row. It's like 2M titles in a
But
row.
I love that. I I mean, there was somebody just had such a great. It was Leslie's title. I forgot Leslie Budwis.
What do it's
The last book, had such a cute. It's always cozies always have plays on words, and
Yeah.
I'm so surprised. I love the alliteration. I don't know why they wouldn't know. In my case, they have to use it something to do with the library. And since there were so many all of a sudden there were so many library books out that the titles were used up. And then they suggested something. It was used. I said, I don't care because I've had other titles, duplicate titles. I don't care, but I defer to them. What can I say when it comes to titles and a few other things and price? We have no control over the
Yeah,
price.
zero say in prices. Zero. If we did,
So
our
we,
ebooks probably wouldn't be so expensive, but here we are.
They all went up recently. They
Mhm.
all went up.
so we have a question for Mia. How did you sell more books in the series to your publisher?
So the way it works with traditional, like in the contract, they'll have something called an option clause, which is they have the option to buy more books in your series. So my original contract was a 3-book series, and then once those 3 books were up, I had to turn in an option proposal, which was it's different for everyone. Every editor is different. So with this one, all I had to do is and Arsenic Double had sold well enough that I didn't really have to put too much work into that proposal. So that one was just like I had to give them ideas for future books that I had, like blurbs for future books, and then I was able to sell it based solely on that. A lot of times, a proposal is maybe the first 3 chapters and like a full synopsis, which means like everything that happens in the book, like the twists and the turns and the killer and the ending and all that stuff. You have to give that ahead of time. But yeah, so usually when you sell the option, the book isn't written yet. You tell them the idea of what a book is and they kind of sign off on it or not. And so that's what I did. So I'm contracted to book 6 in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen series. And so that's how. Will there be more after that? Again, that's not a choice that I get to have either. That's all up to the publisher.
Thank you. And for Mia, someone asked, who designs your cover art? They're always so eye-catching.
The art director at Penguin Random House, her name is Vian Nguyen, and she has designed all my covers, and I love them so much. I have no visual talent. I actually really hate writing descriptions because I don't really see pictures in my head very clearly. It's hard for me to describe things. So when they ask me like, okay, what do you want on your cover? I have like vague ideas. I'm like the dog, this Filipino thing, the food, and then she just like makes magic with it. So I've always been very, very happy with my covers.
Thank you. So it's 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to end with what's in your TBR pile and what are you working on next, which you've already kind of mentioned. So Marilyn, what's on your TBR pile and what's next?
Well, I'm doing just what Mia described. I mean, I know I could send in just 2 or 3 chapters to my editor for the new series, but I am creating a new place, and it's between the New York and Connecticut, and I'm creating an island, and this takes work, and of course a whole new cast of characters and my animals and my paranormal and characters, and I wanted to have the story outlined before I handed it in. And then I have a lot of edits because, as I said, I'm having all these books being done, and I have an as I said, I have 8 books coming out. 3 of them are new this year, and so I'm kind of busy. But oh, and I have a short story in an anthology. I'm very excited about that because I hadn't written a short story in such a long time. And I think it's always good to stretch and do different things. And, so this is, I was happy about that.
So
Short
sounds
stories
like
are
you're
hard.
very busy writing, but is there anything in your to be read pile at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm reading, I want to read Val McDermott's new book, and The Broken Girls. And right now I'm reading Tara Laskowski's The Weekend Retreat. I know her, so I wanted to read it. I read one of her other books, and she's a good writer. And I'll read more of Sheila Lowe's books. I love her mysteries.
Thank you. And so Mia, what's in your TBR pile and what's next for you?
Yeah, so just yesterday I turned in the first draft of My Way to my editor. So I also have it's like Marilyn, I'm also going to be published in multiple age categories. So I last year I sold a YA mystery. It's currently titled Death in the Cards. It involves a high school age tarot it's basically like my queer brown Veronica Mars. It's a queer Filipino teen tarot reader. Her dad's a mystery author. Her mom is a PI. She gets involved in a case of her own, based on one of her clients, her tarot reading clients. So I turned that in yesterday. So I'm like, but I'm gonna, but I'm gonna be getting the second round of edits for Guilt and Ginataan, which is book 5, which comes out later this year. Like any day now. I'm afraid to refresh my email box because like I just know it's gonna be in there. So the YA doesn't come out until next year. Next year I'm gonna have 2 books, but I just turned that in. I'm gonna be editing book 5, which comes out in November. And it's for TBR. Oh, my TBR is like a million miles long. I don't know if you have the same problem, Marilyn, but it's one of like those like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Ever since becoming an author, you lose time to read because you're always reading for something else. You're reading for research, you're reading for a blurb. I also review for book list. And so like wow, reading for fun. What is that like? But all the reasons books that I read for blurbs are amazing. It's just, it's finding the time for it. I just finished like a few days ago, Daniel Amen's adult debut. So he primarily writes in YA, but this is his adult debut thriller. It's called I Might Be in Trouble, and it is so bonkers. It's like a thrill, like, like I can't believe it's a bonkers thrill ride. It's basically um, a queer Mexican American writer who is his life is kind of spiraling, and after a one night stand, he wakes up and the guy that he had a one night stand with is dead in his bed next to him. And so the story's like, what do you do when that happens to you? And so it's like it spirals and spirals. It's so weird that like it is. I mean, the premise sounds utterly bonkers, but it's also really, really relatable. It has such a vulnerable and interesting protagonist that like it was hard to get through just because you're like, oh, you're making so many terrible choices, and I just want to protect you from yourself. But like you have to know what's happening. So yeah, I Might Be in Trouble by Daniel Ammon. I can't remember when it comes out. It comes out sometime this year. But I really enjoyed that. Um, right now I'm trying to, again, because I just finished the deadline, I'm trying to like cram reading in while I can. Raiders of the Lost Heart by Joe Segura. It's based on the title, it's like an adventure rom-com that just came out recently. And oh geez, what else is there? Lulu Sinigtala by Gail D. Villanueva. It's a middle grade based on Filipino mythology. It just came out either earlier this week or last week, and my pre-order is waiting for me at my local indie, and I'm really looking forward to picking that up and checking it out too. So I read across age categories, across genres, because I plan to read and write it all too.
Wonderful. Well, it's 8:05. I just want to say this has been such a wonderful and enjoyable evening, and I wanted to thank you both, Marilyn and Mia, for joining us this evening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you so much for having us. Stay warm and stay
Yes.
safe, everyone.
Yes,
Yes, I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for having us.
And
Thank
lovely to
you.
finally meet you, Marilyn.
yes, definitely. So nice to meet you both.
Yes, it was
And
nice to meet you, Helen.
thank you. And I will continue reading your books and enjoying them all. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care. Good
Bye.
night.